Welcome everyone to the Veteran Vault, a place where stories of courage, sacrifice, and resilience are preserved and honored. If you believe in keeping these powerful histories alive, consider becoming a member of our channel and be part of a community that values true heroism. Today, we're not just sharing a story, we're stepping into a legacy that deserves to be remembered. Imagine being locked in silence, where even a whisper could cost you everything, yet somehow, voices still found a way to be heard. In the darkest moments of captivity, when hope seemed impossible, ordinary men showed extraordinary strength. They turned isolation into connection, pain into purpose, and fear into resilience. This isn't just a story of survival, it's a story of unbreakable human spirit. How long were you held as a prisoner? 6 years. 6 long years. For me, it was 2,115 days. Hearing that, you can't help but feel the weight of it. Some journeys were even heavier than others. So, when did your service begin? I joined on my 19th birthday, back in 1942. 1942, a different world entirely. As for me, I graduated in 1954 from Elon University in North Carolina. At that time, once you finished school, you really only had two options: join the military or wait to be drafted. To even stay in school, you had to keep your grades in the top half of your class. I had signed a contract with the Pittsburgh Pirates and dreamed of playing baseball, but things worked differently back then. If you received more than $5,000, you were required to stay on the main roster for 2 full years. I wasn't ready for the major leagues yet, and at 22, that felt like wasted time. So instead, I chose a different path. I joined the Navy and became a naval aviator. I had always wanted to fly, but in my case, they said my eyesight wasn't good enough, so they grounded that dream early. Funny enough, here I am, almost 102 years old, still needing glasses. Sometimes life doesn't take you where you want to go. It takes you where it decides you need to be. When you were flying, what exactly was your role? I was a ball turret gunner on a B-17. And where did things go wrong? We were shot down over Denmark. Were you captured immediately? Yes, almost instantly. We had already completed our mission and were heading back. We were just 20 minutes away from reaching safe land when a German fighter hit us. The plane caught fire, and for nearly 20 minutes it kept exploding piece by piece. Somehow, we managed to reach land, but just as we did, the wing tore off. The enemy pilot had followed us the entire time, reporting our position. So when we came down, there was already a circle of soldiers waiting. There was no chance of escape, not even a slim one. In Vietnam, it was different, but just as dangerous. I flew the A-6, one of the few aircraft capable of operating in all weather, especially during monsoon season. The day I was shot down wasn't at night like usual. It was a large coordinated mission, what they called an alpha strike. 24 aircraft flying together from an aircraft carrier toward Hanoi, about 100 miles inland. It was a clear, beautiful day. We were flying at 15,000 feet, maintaining formation. As we got closer to the target, about 30 miles out, missiles were launched at us. I was hit by the fourth one. The missile didn't strike directly. It detonated nearby, sending shrapnel tearing into the aircraft. We lost control, and the plane caught fire. I was flying with my bombardier navigator, Lieutenant James Kelly Pastor. We had trained together for 3 years. He survived the crash initially, stayed alive on the ground for 4 days, and then disappeared. I believe he was captured and possibly taken away for intelligence purposes, because that aircraft was highly advanced at the time. I was captured on the second day and taken to a prison camp. That's where my 6 years began. How were you treated during that time? The first 3 years were brutal. There's no softer way to say it. The torture was intense and constant. After 3 years, things changed slightly when their leader died. It didn't become easy, but it shifted from torture to simply surviving each day. They used ropes to torture us, binding our arms behind our backs, forcing the elbows together until circulation stopped. After about 30 minutes, they would release it, and the blood rushing back caused unbearable pain. I went through that twice. There were other methods, too. They would tie you down, leave you exposed, and beat you repeatedly. I was once struck over 100 times in a single session, leaving dozens of open wounds. That went on for weeks. It was relentless. For others, the suffering came in different forms: starvation, freezing temperatures, disease. The conditions were deliberately designed to break you down. Poor food, no hygiene, constant sickness. You couldn't wash, couldn't rest properly, couldn't escape the discomfort. In our case, we were given 2 meals a day, though calling it food feels generous. Pumpkin soup for months, then cabbage, sometimes just clover boiled in water. It was enough to survive, but barely. After an escape attempt, things got worse. I was punished again, tortured again, because I had become a communication link between prisoners. We had figured out a way to pass messages through walls, small openings, tapping systems, anything we could use. At one point, I could connect over 200 prisoners, passing messages across dozens of cells within a day. It gave us a sense of unity, of resistance. Even in isolation, we found a way to stay connected. 6 years. 6 years of that kind of life. And yet, some had it even longer, 8, 9 years. It was never just about time. It was about endurance, about holding on when everything around you was trying to break you. Looking back, it wasn't just survival, it was something deeper. It was the human spirit refusing to collapse, even when pushed to its absolute limit. After some time, the torture finally stopped. It didn't suddenly become easy, but it shifted. The intensity faded, and survival became more about enduring than resisting constant pain. One question people always ask is, how did you even communicate with other prisoners in that kind of isolation? Well, most aviators already knew Morse code, dots, and dashes. But the walls in those prisons were incredibly thick, around 2 feet of solid concrete with a hollow space inside. You could tap a short sound, but you couldn't really create a long one. So Morse code just didn't work there. That's when a man named Smitty Harris, an Air Force pilot who spent more than 8 years as a prisoner, remembered something he had once read. It was about a prison communication system built around a simple alphabet grid. Since you can't evenly fit 26 letters into a square, they removed the letter K, leaving 25 letters total. Whenever you needed a K, you would just use C and rely on context to figure it out. They arranged the alphabet into a 5x5 grid, 5 rows and 5 columns. To send a letter, you tapped in 2 parts. First, you tapped the number of the column, then you paused and tapped the number of the row. For example, if the letter was in the 3rd column and 2nd row, you would tap 3 times, pause, then tap twice. It sounds simple, but it became a lifeline. A way to stay human in a place designed to strip that away. Did the guards know we were communicating? Probably, but they couldn't fully stop it. And honestly, we needed something, anything, to keep our minds alive in that kind of emptiness. Without it, the silence would have destroyed us. For years, there was no contact with home. Nothing. No letters, no updates, no proof that life outside still existed. Then after 3.5 years, I finally received a letter. It was from my daughter. She was only 4 years old when I left. Now she was about 7. Her letter said something so simple, it hit harder than anything else. Dad, I hope you're having a nice time, because we're having a very nice time. She didn't know. For all those years, my family didn't even know if I was alive. They only knew that I had ejected from the aircraft. That was it. No confirmation, no closure, just uncertainty. One night, after all that time, a postman showed up at my house at 10 o'clock. He had found my letter while sorting mail and decided it couldn't wait. He went straight to my home, knocked on the door, and handed it over. That moment became my first real connection back to the world I had lost. When people hear these stories, they often say, "You went through hell." And in many ways, that's true. But survival changes your perspective. You start to see it not just as suffering, but as something that teaches you, forces you to grow in ways you never expected. People also ask if there was ever a real chance to escape. There were attempts, yes, but none of them worked. Every time someone tried, they were caught or killed. The risk was always there, but so was the reality of the consequences. As for where we were held, the journey itself was another kind of nightmare. At first, it was East Prussia, what is now Lithuania. We stayed there for about 6 months until the Russian forces began advancing. Instead of being freed, we were crammed into boxcars, then packed into the hold of a ship so tightly you couldn't even sit down. There was no food, no water, for over 4 days. After that, on a scorching summer day, they forced us to put on heavy coats, chained us, and drove us forward with dogs and bayonets for miles. Then it was another camp, another 6 months, until the front lines moved again. By then, there were no proper camps left. So they just marched us. No destination, no plan. Just movement. That march lasted 86 days. People now call it the German Death March. We lived outside the entire time, exposed to freezing temperatures. I had one blanket. My shoes were so worn out I could see my toes through them. Frostbite became a constant threat. Food was scarce, sometimes nothing for 4 or 5 days. And when it was time to rest, we slept directly on frozen ground. In Vietnam, the conditions were completely different, but just as brutal in their own way. Instead of freezing, it was extreme heat. Temperatures could reach up to 130 degrees. Some days, we would pour our drinking water onto the concrete floor, strip down, and lie on it just to cool our bodies. One side was unbearable cold, the other was suffocating heat. Different environments, same struggle to survive. Before all this happened, I didn't have a wife or children, just my parents, a brother, and a sister. And in that kind of isolation, with no entertainment, no distractions, time itself becomes something you have to fight. For me, I turned inward. I had always been more of an athlete than a student, but in captivity, I began memorizing poetry. Over time, I committed around 65 poems to memory. I would repeat them every day, over and over, just to keep my mind sharp. Somewhere along the way, I developed a strong memory. I could recall numbers, names, details with surprising clarity. It was one small gift that came out of a very dark place. So yes, even in something that terrible, there were moments of growth. It didn't make the experience good, but it gave it meaning, and eventually freedom came. Not through negotiation, but through the end of the war. During the death march, one day the guards suddenly said we wouldn't be moving. That was unusual. Then, around midday, we saw people approaching with a white flag. The German guards disappeared, just like that. We were told that British forces were nearby, but they couldn't transport us. Their base was about 21 kilometers away, and we would have to make our own way there. It was hard to even process what was happening. After everything, the idea of being free didn't feel real at first. A few of us started walking. Along the way, we came across the aftermath of a fight, fallen soldiers, abandoned weapons. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I picked up a rifle and kept moving. Eventually, we reached a farmhouse. I told my friends to wait while I approached. I knocked on the door, and a woman answered, clearly terrified. She begged not to be harmed, saying she wasn't a threat. I assured her we meant no harm. Then I saw horses nearby. We needed them. I told her we were taking them so we could continue moving. She tried to protest, saying they weren't fit to ride. But at that point, survival was all that mattered. We took the horses and kept going. After everything, the camps, the torture, the marches, the hunger, that moment, walking forward on our own terms, was the first real step back to life. He asked me what I planned to do with the horses, and I told him about the outpost we were trying to reach. He paused for a moment and then offered another idea. He said he could hook up a tractor and wagon and take us there instead. I told him that would work just fine. As we made our way, I had him stop and pick up any stragglers we came across. By the time we reached the outpost, I thanked him and told him he was free to go. When I was finally released, I was actually in decent condition. The last 3 years had been more about surviving and waiting things out. There wasn't much torture during that time, but the earlier years had been extremely brutal. At one point, back in 1969, during the worst of it, my weight dropped to around 113 pounds. People always ask how I even knew that, and the truth is, we had figured out a way to estimate it. We used the water we bathed in and calculated displacement. One of the guys was good with that kind of thing, and we all relied on each other's knowledge to get by. It took some time to adjust after coming home. They didn't send us straight back to normal life. Instead, they kept us in a hospital for about 3 weeks, and our families came to stay there with us. After that, they slowly eased us back into regular life. At first, we were only allowed to go home for an hour at a time. The concern was that going from a dull prison environment straight into a normal home filled with color, furniture, and family life might overwhelm us. Eventually, after about a month, we were able to return home properly. As time has passed, many of the men I went through that experience with are gone. Out of the 591 of us who came out, only around 300 are still living now. I consider myself fortunate. I was somewhere in the middle age-wise, 30 when I was shot down and 37 when I came home. Some of the others spent even longer in captivity. Smitty Harris, the man who introduced the communication code we used, passed away not long ago. Most of the guys I was close to are no longer here. People sometimes ask me how I've lived as long as I have. Honestly, I don't really know. My father passed away at 65, my brother at 65, and even my daughter at 68. I usually joke and say that about 68 years ago, I got amnesia, and when the time came to die, I just forgot to do it. When I finally got home, it had been a long delay. I was liberated on May 3rd, but I didn't make it back until July 31st. My parents were still living on the farm, and when I arrived, they had a crew there working. I remember there being a big celebration, but to be honest, a lot of it is a blur. I know it was a joyful moment, but the details are hard to recall. During the war, not all of us were released at once. We had been split into smaller groups during the death march, so different groups were liberated in different parts of Germany. In Vietnam, our release was handled in stages as well. After years of negotiations, we were told we'd be going home in groups. I was in the second group. I remember when the bombing started in Hanoi in 1972. The B-52s came in, and the strikes were close enough that we could feel the impact. We used the boards from our beds to shield ourselves as best we could, while the walls shook and bits of concrete fell. Food was scarce during that time, but we had a feeling that once the bombing stopped, things would change. Sure enough, after about 12 days, the bombing ended, and not long after that, they gathered us and told us we'd be going home. When my turn came, they gave us clothes and small bags for travel. But just an hour before we were supposed to leave, they told us there had been a violation somewhere and the release was delayed. After 6 years in captivity, news like that didn't mean much anymore. it just meant more waiting. A week later, they came back and told us we were leaving. We boarded a C-141 with about 115 men. Even then, it didn't fully feel real. It wasn't until the plane left Vietnam and we crossed over water that things finally sank in. In aviation, we say feet dry when you're over land and feet wet when you're over water. The moment we hit feet wet, there was a noticeable shift in the plane and in all of us. That's when we knew we were truly on our way home. We landed in the Philippines, where thousands of people showed up to greet us, even though it was early in the morning. We stayed there for a few days before being flown back to our hometowns. That's when I saw my wife again for the first time in years. As for the war itself, I see it as a tragedy. The troops did their job, but the country didn't fully stand behind them. Millions of men and women served, and many came home feeling like they had to apologize for being part of a losing effort. Meanwhile, those of us who were prisoners received recognition that really should have gone to all of them. I've always felt that deeply. In the end, it was an experience that shaped everything about my life. It tested every part of who we were, but it also showed what people are capable of enduring. And despite everything, I'm grateful I made it through. What stands out most about stories like this isn't just the hardship, but the way people adapted to survive under conditions that were designed to break them. In those prison camps, especially during the Vietnam War, isolation was one of the most powerful weapons used against prisoners. Being cut off from human contact, from news, from family, over time that can be just as damaging as physical torture. That's why something as simple as communication became so important. The tapping code they developed wasn't just a clever workaround, it was a lifeline. It allowed them to remind each other that they weren't alone, to share information, to pass along encouragement, and even maintain a sense of structure and discipline. That sense of discipline played a huge role in survival. Many of the prisoners created routines for themselves, even in confinement. They would mentally rehearse procedures, recite memorized material, or even teach classes through the walls using that tapping system. Some men went through entire books from memory. Others taught math, history, or languages. It gave them a sense of purpose and helped keep their minds active when everything else had been stripped away. Without that, it would have been much easier to lose hope. Another thing that really defined their experience was the code of conduct they lived by. U.S. military personnel are trained with a code that emphasizes resistance, unity, and responsibility, even in captivity. That doesn't mean they never broke under pressure. Many were pushed beyond what most people could tolerate, but there was a strong effort to support one another and resist giving the enemy anything useful. Even small acts of defiance, like refusing to bow or secretly communicating, carried huge meaning. It wasn't just about survival, it was about holding on to identity and dignity. The physical toll, of course, was severe. Malnutrition, disease, injuries from torture, and harsh living conditions left lasting effects. Dropping to extremely low body weight wasn't uncommon. And yet, what's remarkable is how many of them were able to recover physically once they were home. The human body can bounce back in incredible ways when given proper care, but the mental and emotional recovery often took much longer. Reintegration into normal life was another challenge entirely. Imagine going from years of confinement where every movement is controlled to suddenly being surrounded by family, color, noise, and freedom. It sounds like it would be instantly joyful, and in many ways it was, but it could also be overwhelming. That's why the military tried to ease them back into civilian life gradually. Even then, many former prisoners struggled with things like sleep, anxiety, or simply adjusting to everyday decisions that most people take for granted. There's also a deeper layer when you look at how they were received back home. Unlike soldiers returning from some other wars, many Vietnam veterans didn't come back to widespread support or appreciation. The war itself was controversial, and that affected how people viewed those who served. For former prisoners of war, there was recognition and honor, but many of them felt that all veterans deserved that same level of respect. It created a complicated mix of pride, frustration, and sometimes guilt. Over time, many of these men became storytellers, not because they wanted attention, but because they felt a responsibility to share what happened. Their experiences offer insight into resilience, leadership, and the strength of the human spirit under extreme. This story is not just about captivity or suffering. It is about the strength of the human spirit when everything else is taken away. These men prove that even in silence, unity can speak. Even in darkness, hope can survive. Their courage reminds us that true strength is not in power, but in perseverance and dignity. And long after the chains are gone, it is their resilience that continues to inspire the world.